There are roughly 150,000 people who will die today, and almost every single one of them, in those final seconds, will think the same thing. Not about money, not about regret, not about God. Something stranger. Something that researchers spent decades trying to explain, and when they finally did, the answer was more unsettling than the question. Because here's the part nobody talks about. Your last thought, the very last firing of your consciousness, might not even feel like dying. It might feel like waking up. Let that sit for a second. Scientists studying near-death experiences and terminal brain activity discovered something in 2023 that genuinely disturbed the neuroscience community. In the final moments of cardiac arrest, the human brain doesn't go quiet, it doesn't fade, it surges. A sudden, violent explosion of gamma-wave activity, the same brain waves associated with hyperconscious dreaming, peak focus, and deep memory recall. Your brain, as it's shutting down, becomes more electrically active than it's ever been in your entire waking life, which means your last thought isn't a whisper, it's a scream. But here's where it gets strange. What is it actually screaming about? Researchers at the University of Michigan placed electrodes on dying patients with their family's consent. What they found was that moments before death, the brain began flooding the hippocampus with what neuroscientists call a life review cascade, a rapid, involuntary playback of autobiographical memory, not random memories. Specific ones, weighted ones, emotionally charged ones, and almost every person, regardless of culture, age, or belief, reviewed the same category of moment, not achievements, not failures, not their greatest adventures, moments of connection, a Tuesday morning with someone they loved, a conversation they almost didn't have, a hug that lasted longer than usual, a laugh so genuine it felt like it came from somewhere deeper than the body. This is where it starts to get personally uncomfortable, because think about your own week. How much of it was real? How much of it was performance? How much of your actual life, the ticking hours you're spending right now, would even qualify for that final cascade? Or would your brain, at the end, have to reach back years, maybe decades, to find something worth replaying? That question isn't rhetorical. It's a diagnosis. But then something strange happened when researchers went deeper. They started interviewing survivors of cardiac events who had been resuscitated, people who had been technically moments from that final thought. And across hundreds of interviews, a pattern emerged that nobody expected. The survivors weren't afraid. Not in those last moments. The fear had come before, during the panic, the chest pain, the scrambling. But in the actual threshold moment, the one where the brain surges and the cascade begins, almost universally, they described something that felt like recognition, like meeting someone you haven't seen in a very long time, like arriving somewhere familiar. One cardiologist, Pim van Lommel, who spent 20 years studying this, said something in an interview that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He said, "The dying brain doesn't appear to be shutting off. It appears to be tuning in." Tuning in to what exactly? Nobody can answer that. And that silence is louder than anything. If the brain's final act is an involuntary review of your most emotionally meaningful moments, then there's a terrifying implication hiding inside that fact. One that nobody wants to say out loud. You are, right now, creating the material for that review. Every choice you make about how to spend your time, who to give your attention to, which emotions you allow yourself to actually feel instead of scroll past, you are curating your own final experience. The last thing your consciousness ever touches will be built from the hours you're living right now. And modern life has become almost surgically designed to prevent those hours from being real. Think about it. The average person now spends 11 hours a day consuming media. 11 hours, absorbing other people's lives, other people's emotions, other people's stories, while their own story quietly accumulates days that feel indistinguishable from each other. The cascade doesn't replay the time you watched someone else cry on television. It replays the time you cried yourself. Really cried. For something real. How long ago was that for you? But this is where it gets disturbing. And I mean genuinely disturbing, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, slow-burning way that will probably follow you into tomorrow. There's a psychological phenomenon called experiential poverty. It's not a diagnosis. It's not in any medical manual. But psychologists who study end-of-life regret have started using the term to describe what they see over and over in patients confronting death. People who didn't suffer great tragedies, people who didn't make catastrophic mistakes, people who simply, quietly chose comfort over depth for long enough that the texture of their inner life became thin. They're not haunted by what went wrong. They're haunted by the absence of what could have been real. One palliative care nurse named Bronnie Ware spent years documenting the final confessions of dying patients. The number one regret, far above the others, wasn't "I worked too much" or "I wish I'd been braver." It was something more specific, more suffocating, more ordinary. "I wish I had let myself be happier, not pursued happiness. Let it." As if the barrier was internal. As if joy had been available the whole time, and they'd been too defended, too armored, too ironically detached to let it actually land. And now here's the reframe. This video was never really about death. It was never about neuroscience or brainwaves or the mechanics of dying. It's about the thing death reveals when you look at it directly. That the way you die is a mirror held up to the way you lived. And the way you live is shaped, invisibly, constantly, by how much of your life you're actually present for. We talk about death like it's something that interrupts life. But what if that's backwards? What if death is the only moment where life gets fully honest? Where the noise stops, the performance ends, and what remains is just the truth of what mattered. The brain doesn't lie in those final seconds. It can't. There's no time to curate, no filter to apply, no reason to perform for anyone. The Cascade takes everything you gave it and shows it back to you in pure, unfiltered form, which means the only question that actually matters isn't, "What will I think about when I die?" It's, "Am I building a life worth thinking about?" And almost nobody is asking that question. Not really. Not in the middle of a Tuesday, not during another forgettable evening, not while scrolling through the curated highlight reel of everyone else's existence. We've gotten very good at feeling busy while feeling empty, at moving constantly while going nowhere. There's a philosopher, Irvin Yalom, who spent his career doing therapy with terminally ill patients, and he said something that I think is the most quietly devastating sentence I've ever read. He said, "The way you live your life is the way you will face your death. Not a judgment, not a warning, a mirror. If you live defended, you'll die defended." If you live at a distance from your own experience, the Cascade will have to travel very far to find something real to play back. But if you chose, even sometimes, even imperfectly, to be actually present for your own life, to feel things without immediately managing them, to love people in ways that cost you something, to have conversations that matter more than they're comfortable, to sit in a moment long enough that it actually becomes a memory, not just a photograph, then maybe, when the gamma waves surge and the lights go strange and the Cascade begins, what comes back isn't grief. Maybe what comes back is gratitude. You won't know if you lived well until you can no longer change it. That's the design. That's the architecture of a human life. The review only comes at the end. The feedback only arrives when the exam is over. Every moment you have right now is still editable, still raw material, still capable of becoming something the Cascade could actually use. But that window is not permanent. Somewhere, in a timeline you can't see, a version of today is the last ordinary day you'll ever have. The last Tuesday. The last unremarkable evening that you'll later wish you'd looked at more carefully. The last moment before everything changes and the countdown you never knew was running quietly stops. You don't know which day that is. But your brain, when it finally gets honest, will remember exactly how you spent it.